KILR. KILR Games.
Hello and welcome, gamers, simmers, and pilots. Maybe a few of you pilots that happen to be out there who are curious about these old simulators and maybe seeing them again. I am the KILR Gamer, and welcome to the World Tour, featuring Flight Simulator 2 by SubLogic for the Amiga, Commodore Amiga computer. I guess you could say specifically I'm doing this on an Amiga 500. It's emulated, but it's emulated with the, I want to say hardware, but it's emulated with the information that would be in a emulated Amiga. And I wonder, you know what? Let me see if I can pull up a. Oh, I can probably do it with this. But let me see if I can pull it up a different way here. Dum, 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 dum. Yes, I can do it this way. Okay, I just need to make this a little bigger. And I might have to... No. Okay. Well, yeah, that's what I thought. I didn't think that was going to work. Here we go. Here we go. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. All right. So this is WinUAE, which is a part of... So I never even gone over this, and I should probably go over this. It's part of something that I have called Amiga Forever. Now, if you get the Amiga Forever package, it gives you the ROMs that you need in order to run the emulator. And this has got to be next to the MAME emulator that emulates arcade machines. This has got to be one of the best emulators that I have come across when it comes to emulating computers. There's so much here that you can do. And I want to show that to you here. So here you can select the model of the Amiga that you want to emulate. So you got the Amiga 500, the Plus, the 600, the original one, which is the 1000, the 3000, the 4000, the CD32, which was the 32-bit gaming machine, CD-TV, and something about like an expanded WinUAE. I haven't really played around with that. But then here you can select the different ROM chips. So and this is what's available for the Amiga 500. You've got the original 1.2 and then 1.3, and OCS means the original chip system or set, and ECS was an expanded chipset. This depended like the graphic capability and sound capability. I don't think it really, if I remember correctly, I don't think it really changed with expanded chipset. It may have, but compatibility seems to be lost when you use that. So this is the most common one, and this is the one where a lot of the popular Amiga games, when they came out, what they worked on was the 1.3. The Amiga 1200 had basic non-expanded configuration. I can't believe I just changed that. I don't want that. The Amiga 1200 was like the Amiga 500 all over again, but it had an advanced graphics architecture AGA chipset, which increased the ability of graphics as far as the colors and stuff like that. And so that one had some more advanced games made for it, pretty much on par with what the PC was doing at the time with graphics and sound cards. But eventually the Amiga fell behind with its graphics, and the PC just pretty much reigned supreme on that. So here you've got the different chipsets. Here's the AGA, like I mentioned. ECS Denise here. It kind of explains like what it was used in. And I had an Amiga 500 and an Amiga 2000. The Amiga 2000, I'd used the Video Toaster, which was a video switching program. And then I used that in turn with the Video Flyer, which was a nonlinear editing board. You hook those up to some SCSI drives and you could do nonlinear editing and put together videos and stuff. And once I got an Amiga 4000 to put that in, it gave me even more capabilities as far as like color wipes and stuff like that. And this didn't have to be rendered out, which was really cool. It's unlike Adobe Premiere and that one program that's used on the Mac a lot. I forget what it was called. But again, the quality on it fell behind too because it was only analog output. It was not digital. But anyhow, here's more details as far as the advanced chipset. You could do compatible settings, or you could, try. This is weird. I've never seen the power supply thing. I've never really messed with that. But then you've got your ROM set that you can select here. And then there's the Amiga 500. Man, I don't remember being able to take cartridges. That's weird. I knew the Commodore 64 could. But apparently, yeah, there's cartridges and there's flash RAMs. I've never touched any of that stuff. And then you got the RAM. You can select, okay, chip RAM was what was used by like the graphics. Think of that as the on your graphics cards where you have that memory, that RAM memory on board the graphics card. That's pretty much what chip memory was. And then you had your fast memory, basically your expanded memory. Or was it? Because there's slow memory too. Then there was Zora 3. So I guess Zora 3 was a slot. So you could put memory on that too. Ooh, 2 gigabytes, really? Ooh, I wonder what that would do. Probably would make Flight Simulator so fast. I've always found that it's just best to do it how it originally came out. You might be able to tweak it a little bit further, but any more than that and things start to not work right. Then you got your floppy drives. So, and the Amiga was pretty much floppy drive, especially for games, which was kind of a annoying thing too. But here you had the opportunity of putting 4 floppy drives together. So if you had a game that came on 4 floppy drives or 6 floppies, sorry, like Dragon's Lair and Space Ace come to mind, you just put them all in, put your images all on here and you're good to go. Then you got your hard drives, and then you got expansions. So here there was something called retargetable graphics card. So this allowed you to get, those millions of colors that you could use on paint programs and stuff like that. And so this allows you to set that up. And then you got your display settings as far as having it in a window. I had lunch, so I have hiccups. Or full screen. You've got your sound. So you select your your driver here. This here, I think, is great. The floppy drive sound emulation. So when you hear, and you've heard it before, when we get into an area for Flight Simulator, like it starts loading a certain area, you hear that beep 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 beep. It's such a signature sound for us people that use the Amiga and grew up with. It's just a signature sound. So it's neat that that was put in there, and it's also very helpful because it lets me know that it didn't freeze. If I hear it loading and then it stops, I'm like, oh, good, it's good to go. But other times when I would know it would freeze, it was like as if it's just continuing to spin. So it's just really weird. It's like when the machine hangs up or freezes, it's just like it was. It's just like what I remember with the actual machine itself. I mean, literally, you could get away with this emulator and never have to own a real Amiga ever. And that's how well this thing runs. The only thing that it doesn't emulate is the actual hardware slot, specifically the video slot, which was used for the video toaster and for the video flyer. There were some capture cards that used that slot, and those obviously can't be used either. If they manage to work their way around that, that'd be great. But I know they won't. They won't be able to. Then you've got your game ports and your parallel serial port emulation input as far as game controls, which, well, that doesn't seem to work very well with the Flight Simulator. Then you got like output as far as like maybe outputting, because you can record videos and stuff directly in here, and I don't. I use OBS. Then you got filters. You got this thing called disk swapper. If you had like tons of floppy disks and maybe you had to swap between them very quickly, this would do it. Miscellaneous stuff. And PRI, printers and extensions. I'm guessing what this. That's what this is. But so this is how detailed this is, and this is what I use to run the Amiga stuff. And like I said, it's just like running an Amiga. I mean, what's neat is with the Amiga Forever package, you can boot off of the CD-ROM. Or make an image off of it and just boot off of that. But you can stick it in your CD-ROM drive and boot it up, and it's like you're booting right to an Amiga computer with your PC. How cool is that? So you don't have to boot into your PC and then run the emulator. You could just, boot off of the CD or DVD in this case, or the image, and it's like booting up right into an Amiga. They kind of said that they kind of put that in there as kind of a joke, that you put it on someone's computer and they boot it up, and it's like, what happened to my computer? But I think that's just a neat little option. I mean, there's so many neat things about this emulator that it's one of my favorites. But so, and I never gone over that really before on this series, and I think, well, this is a good opportunity to do so. But where are we? Well, we're at Waterloo. We came here for an ABBA concert. Not really. So let's talk about where we're going. Here we are. Here. My goodness, it's like not slow PC. So here we are, Waterloo. We're going to go here. Dubuque Municipal. Right next to this river. So, should be a nice little flight. How are we going to get there? We'll tune in, and we'll leave on the, looks like the 095 vector should get us there. And we can tune in Dubuque here. No, actually, you know what? I think we're going to leave on 090, and then we can intersect with whatever runway this is, that's probably 13, I'm going to guess. So we'll intersect with that radio and turn, and that should get us decently lined up, I think, with the runway there. So let us go ahead, get everything set up, and we'll get up in the air. And wouldn't you know, the system crashed. Like I said, when it crashes, it crashes. Okay, well, I think we're back now. Not in the same exact position, but we are back at the airport. So here we go. It's the Amiga in all its glory. Oh my goodness. And that thing that you saw with the floppy disk that said Workbench, in order to boot up the machine, you had to boot off of a floppy. It was not on the, your startup stuff was not, there was no BIOS or anything like that. You booted off of the Workbench, which I guess you could think of it as Windows, right? You couldn't really do anything without Windows. You had to boot into Windows. That's what Workbench was. It was the Windows multitasking environment before PC or Mac even had one. But yeah, all right. So I guess we'll try this again with our map here. Okay, there we go. I'm having to do that on. If you see me looking off to the side, it's because I'm looking at another monitor, and on that monitor, as a matter of fact, I can move this right over here. Of course, this is covering. Sorry, I'm kind of talking to myself here. Ah, there we go. I don't have to look. I mean, I'll look off to the side to maybe look at the map. There's other times where I look at the camera to make sure that whatever I'm trying to show in front of the camera, you can actually see. So if I'm looking off to the side, I'm like, just because I'm not sure if you're seeing it or not. I can do this. I can now, I've got it now on the monitor in front of me. Usually I do a full screen and at least on some of the other stuff, but this works. Okay. So now we'll go ahead and set our stuff here, which is, let's see, we want to set this to 112.2, 2. And we were taking the 090. There it goes. And Dubuque, which is 115.8. Our DME did not load up just yet. Okay, and we were saying we want to take runway 13, so it's going to be 130. 130. It's like clicking and holding. Okay, well, let's try this again. Oh my goodness. Oh, not hitting the right key for my mags. My magnetos. Which direction are we facing? 313. Probably, I guess, take this runway and head the opposite direction. That sounds good to me. I'm multitasking myself. It's almost as if I have, you know, a control room in here. Let's see. Back course is 180. Nope, I don't want that. We'll take this runway. For those of you who haven't seen the other videos, I have allergies. Had it my whole life. Now on our flight, we'll have a little bit of time. I want to bring up a history of flight simulation and kind of show you where the Commodore 64 emulator, Commodore 64 is a good emulator too, but the Commodore 64 Flight Simulator 2 and the Amiga Flight Simulator 2, how those two compare to Microsoft Flight Simulator as far as the versions, like which versions of Microsoft Flight Simulator is it comparable to? And should I do a world tour on those also? I don't know if it makes much sense to do it. It's probably almost a repeat of what I'm doing, but it's a possibility. Okay. Might be memorable for those that have played those instead of Commodore 64 or the Amiga. I think we're set. Let's go on. For a moment, I kept thinking, shouldn't there be clouds in the sky? I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. This version doesn't have clouds. It has an overcast of just gray. Up, up, and away! Bring the landing gear out. When that goes up, I keep wanting to hear a sound, too. It's like, bzzz. But nope, no sound. No sound whatsoever. And that gray road right there, that is probably going to lead us out to Dubuque. So we got a little bit of visual reference there as well as our instruments. go ahead and our autopilot will set that to 3,500 feet. Let's switch this back and forth. Nope, that did not activate that yet. We probably have to wait for our famous disk drive to load. Once we hear that load, it's like, oh, loading in the next section. Okay. Let's see what I can pull up here. Alrighty. Okay, so here we go. This is a wiki site of the history of Microsoft Flight Simulator. And as far as SubLogic flight simulators, the first generation was for Apple II and TRS-80. And then the second generation was for Commodore 64, so, you know, these right here. And the third generation was Amiga, Atari ST, and the Macintosh. So here is the first generation Apple II and TRS-80, 1979 and 1980. So here's what it looked like right here. I don't know if we can make that any bigger. Doesn't appear that we can, but you can see it right here. So this is the original flight simulator. I don't think it could go very far or do much with it, but there it is. Like how it says, $25 Flight Simulator 1 is a visual flight simulator that gives you realistic, stable aircraft control. Hey, that was big stuff back then. Alright, and then we had the second generation. This is where I first started with the Commodore 64. So here is a screenshot from Flight Simulator 2 showing the southern end of Meigs Field in Chicago. The fact that this has got some color to it right here, that was not the Commodore 64 version. Our disk drive loaded. Let me see here. There we go. I changed our, just to show you, I changed our nav1, just moved it off and moved it back again. Sometimes you just got to do that. And we got 73 miles until we get to Dubuque. So, oh yes, we have plenty of time to talk about stuff. And there's not much to see visually, so, boop. All right. So the Commodore 64 version looked just like this, minus these colors on the that you're seeing here. The red was there, but not these blue lines and stuff like that. This is actually kind of an eyesore, if you ask me. And then the third generation was the Amiga, Atari ST, and Macintosh. So it was still called Flight Simulator 2, but it was still third generation. And what made it third generation? Well, it came with the autopilot. This is where the spot plane first came in, and being able to look at things from tower view. And plus, you have some of the control panel is filled in. Plus, the center lines. Oh my goodness, they're so much better on the Amiga. They're nice, thick lines that you can line up with. Whereas on the Commodore 64, it was like this thin, jagged line. Trying to get centered on that was like nearly impossible. Now let's look at Microsoft Flight Simulator version 1. So they obtained the license to port Flight Simulator to their platform, and this is it right here. So it's very, very similar to the Commodore 64. It's displaying color on a composite monitor. What's always made it different is this curve right here of the control panel, which it's funny, it's when I was growing up, I'm like, yeah, I wish I had that curve right there. And that curve has always kind of stayed with it with Microsoft Flight Simulator, and you'll see that on as we progress through here. And it's funny how early versions of Microsoft Flight Simulator, I'm reading here, were used as a test for PC compatibility. If a computer could run Microsoft Flight Simulator 1.1 and Lotus 123, you want to remember that? Then it was considered 100% IBM PC compatible. And if it couldn't do it, and then it was not. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know if the scenery discs that they came out for the PC would work on version 1 or not. Flight Simulator 2. This version didn't offer too much more than Microsoft Flight Simulator version 1. The graphics were somewhat improved, as well as more precise simulation in general. So you can see here, like on this one, it looks like the airport's kind of filled in, whereas it was just lines on a green backdrop. The simulation was a little bit more precise, and the simulator expanded the scenery coverage to include a model of the entire United States, although the airports were limited to the same areas as in version 1. However, compatibility with SubLogic scenery discs was provided, which were released in the following years, gradually covering the whole USA, Hawaii, Japan, and part of Europe. Well, no, it did not cover the whole USA, because not everything was released. Okay, and then you got version 3 of Microsoft Flight Simulator, and you can see now that now we've got some things that are shaded, like buildings and stuff that are now shaded in. Control panel still looks relatively the same. These were lifted from the Amiga and Atari ST versions. And this also had the Learjet 25, which is the Amiga also has the Learjet 25. Flight Simulator 3 also allowed the user to customize the display, multiple windows, each displaying one of the several views. You can do the same thing here on the Amiga. You've noticed that when I pull up the map, it pulls it up in a different window. This version included a program to convert the old series of SubLogic scenery discs into scenery files, which can then be copied to the Flight Simulator 3 directory, allowing the user to expand the Flight Simulator world. And I'm guessing that if you're flying with those scenery discs, since they weren't made for Flight Simulator 3, it's probably going to look a lot like Flight Simulator 2. So yeah, Flight Simulator 2.0 is, other than a few graphical improvements, is pretty much just like Flight Simulator 2 for SubLogic. And then you have Flight Simulator 4.0. So the control panel still looks about the same, but now they added dynamic scenery with more detailed roads and bridges and buildings that allowed users to design their own aircraft. And they use that with the, let's see, you're able to use the Microsoft Flight Simulator Aircraft and Scenery Designer for version 4.0. Now, it might be worth doing a worldwide tour with Flight Simulator 4.0. If I've got the Aircraft Scenery Designer, I'd have to probably put in the airports that couldn't be put in on Flight Simulator 4, and you could use a scenery disc. So, but we'd be able to put like buildings and stuff at the airports. There's a large series of add-on products that were produced for Flight Simulator 4 between 1989 and 1993, and that was the Aircraft Scenery Designer, which I just showed you. Remember CompuServe? I sure do. That's what I had. And then from Mallard Software and BAO came the Sound Graphics and Aircraft upgrade. This added digital and synth sound capability to FS4, which used to be only via PC speaker. And then second, a variety of high-resolution modes became available. And then the Adventure module was added to Aircraft Adventure Factory. There is a Scenery Enhancement Edition, which further enhanced the scenery files and allowed for objects to be used as static objects. And again, scenery files, the SubLogic scenery disk could be used with Flight Simulator 4. And then you got Flight Simulator 5, and well, you know this one. This is the one that 5.1. 5.0 was on floppy disk for DOS, and Flight Simulator 5.1, which kind of expanded on 5.0, and it was CD-ROM. So it's pretty much the same thing, but it added better performance, weather effects, storms, 3D clouds, and fog. And then you got Flight Simulator 95, which was, they said, more or less just a port from the DOS version. But I would say it was more than just a port, because if you saw Flight Simulator 95 and Flight Simulator 98, they look alike. So Flight Simulator 98, that's where it changed the Cessna panel. Well, it changed in 5.0, and then it changed again in Flight Simulator 98. Then you've got Flight Simulator 2000. 2002, which added the air traffic control, and many will know this one right here, Flight Simulator 2004. Argued to be possibly one of the best in the series because it was pretty well optimized for the PC. It ran great, it still runs great. And then the last one, FSX, which most people have moved on and are playing. And for all intents and purposes, it's still a very decent simulator, especially when you can upgrade it to like Orbix scenery. It looks pretty good. On PCs nowadays, it runs pretty decent. It's limited to its 32-bit architecture, so it has out-of-memory problems if you push it too far. But then you've got Prepared, which is, instead of ED, it's 3D, which with version 4 has 64-bit architecture, so you don't have that memory problem anymore. But it still looks like FSX. There's a few minor improvements to it, but it still looks like FSX. And then you've got the Microsoft Flight, which was just horrible. It was a horrible release by Microsoft. Here's Prepared. So they purchased some of the intellectual property from Microsoft, but it could not be released as a game. Whereas Dovetail Games, it's like they got the other part of the property where they could release it as a game. This is where the Steam edition of FSX came from, and what was going to be Flight Sim World, which was canceled. I don't think they ever explained why it was canceled. From what I read, it wasn't looked upon very favorably with the downloadable content and stuff on there, but supposedly they were working on ways to make it better. So that's your history lesson. Flight Simulator History 101 is now complete. So my question, should I do a worldwide tour and include, I really wouldn't be able to do much with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2. 1 and 2 I wouldn't be able to do much with. I'd be able to fly, in the limited areas that come with it. I don't think the SubLogic scenery disc worked with it, based on what I read. So we'd be stuck with just the Chicago area, or the Seattle area, or the New York area, or it was Los Angeles. So we'd only be able to match the world tour on the other simulators when we got to those areas. Maybe it's worth it, maybe it's not, I don't know. It really does not look that much more different than the Commodore 64. So why do a repeat on it? I don't know. You could say the Amiga version looks pretty darn close to the Commodore 64, and you'd be right. But the reason why I'm including this, it's memorable to me. So I wanted to do this not only for myself, but also to share with others. I never played Microsoft Flight Simulator 1, 2, or 3, or 4 for that matter. I had an Amiga. I didn't have a PC. I didn't get a PC until the limitations of the Amiga started to show. And then I got a PC emulator, and I had Flight Simulator 5.1. That did not work so well. It was more like a slideshow Flight Simulator is what it was. It just wasn't fast enough. But then I got my first PC, which was a Packard Bell, a Packard Bell Pentium 90 machine. And I was finally able to play my Flight Simulator. And I, kind of hopped around the world as much as I could with it. The coverage was sparse, like Iowa only had one airport. Some states only had one airport or two. But it was enough for you to be able to make stopping points to fly around the world. It had more VORs, navigational. The navigation was there. And then they had stuff like the scenery and object designer, where you could just go in and put in the airports if you needed to, which is what we're going to have to do for Flight Simulator 5.1 and the Windows 95, kind of the Windows 95 edition, mainly 5.1. There's a lot of airports that just aren't in there. They're like here in the Commodore Amiga and Commodore 64, but yet they're not there in 5.1. So we're going to have to put them in there. But yeah, interesting stuff. And I'm trying to do what I can to get the most out of these simulators, because this world tour might be one of the last things that I do with Flight Simulator next to VR, which would be an X-Plane. X-Plane is pretty much the next generation Flight Simulator, to be honest with you. Version 11, I've watched it for several years, and I was kind of like, nah. Well, we're getting kind of closer. Number 10 was like kind of close to what I wanted, but not quite. But then 11, I didn't get it when it first came out, but when I started thinking about doing this world tour, I was deciding, should I try it? Should I give it a try? And because I've seen some amazing videos with it, and finally I just kind of jumped into it, and I love it. It's great. It has its idiosyncrasies, like the overlays. The overlays are great, but there are some areas where the overlays are just, there's like, you got like these roads and these freeway systems that all layer up upon each other like a mess. Like, that worked out well, didn't it? But with the ortho photos, that looks great. It took me a little bit to get used to the ortho photos and to get it working and figure it out. But once I did, now I was hooked into it. I wouldn't go back to the default graphics, because that and the overlays it's like, it really gives me a feeling of what it is that I'm flying over without it looking flat. Well, the river's up there ahead of us, so that means the airport's not too far away. And Flight Simulator has always been near and dear to my heart. Growing up as a kid, I always wanted to be a pilot. An airline pilot was one of the big things I wanted to do. My life just didn't go in that direction, but I've always had a fascination for Flight Simulator, and so this is a very personal thing to me. And with me just kind of talking about it and sharing it with you is sharing a piece of myself. And who doesn't like making friends, right? So this is a way of, sharing a piece of myself with you, and, making friendships with you, something that we share in common, Flight Simulator. Maybe some things that I'm sharing with you can relate with. Others, maybe not so, or maybe I mentioned some things that it's kind of like, oh yeah. And that's why we have the comments section. Gives you a chance to reach out to me and share your experiences. I'd love to hear from you. Don't be afraid to leave a comment. The airport must be off. Okay, no, it's not. Our needle is, do you see this? Our needle's beginning to center, so we're reaching our turning point. It's going to be off in this direction. I was a little bummed when I got the Amiga 4000 because my flight simulator no longer worked on it. It worked on the 2000. The Amiga 2000 was just basically a big box that you put, you know, your expansion cards and stuff in, and that's where I had my video toaster. So it was basically an Amiga 500 as a box. Instead of being like the Commodore 64, where it was a computer built into like a keyboard. Oh, but I tell you what, that Commodore 64 and the Amiga 500 were popular computers. And in fact, it was so small. I mean, talk about portable. You know, that was a portable computer. You could definitely, you know, have, you know, LAN parties and stuff with that, or at least, you know, bring your Commodore 64 over to a friend's house and sit there and play, or, you know, play together, or, you know, whatever the case may be. I never did, but I did have friends that had Commodore 64. So, see, we were right. That line right there leads us to Dubuque. Let us begin our descent. Set this to say 2,800 feet. You know, and as far as flying cross country, I never went this kind of detailed. If anything, I did like big jumps and flew around the world. But what we're doing on this series is going to be a lot more finer detailed than that. I mean, we're really going to fly and experience different areas. They're not going to look, you know, overly fantastic or detailed on the Commodore 64 or Amiga, but I'm just doing it for that, for the retro memory's sake. And it's a good base to kind of start off with that I can base the other simulators off of. Oh, wow. Wow. Listen to this enough times, it sounds like a like a jam. Oh, wow, da da. Oh, wow, da da. Yes, I know, I'm weird, I'm crazy. I embrace my craziness. There's our airport. We've got our yellow city over here. One thing's for sure, I may have flew around with the Amiga and was in the scenery discs, but not as much as I was in the Commodore 64. And some of you who might be watching, whoa. My fingers fell asleep on the keyboard. Some of you that are actually watching these videos, you've already heard me talk about this stuff. But I figure there's going to be some of you who may have not watched these videos from the very beginning. You may have been interested in a specific flight, such as Waterloo to Dubuque. You know, you might be like, oh, yeah, I live in the area. I'm familiar with that. I would love to, you know, watch this. You know, and for the benefit of those people, you get the opportunity to hear some of the stuff that you didn't hear in the other videos. That's not going to say that I'm going to repeat the same thing on every video. I try to go over some newer stuff too, like some of the stuff that I get in the mail that I've been collecting for the other simulators, because I'm trying to really build those up and really get the most out of this world tour. This world tour is going to take a few years, is what I've been figuring. But this is kind of like I'm going to call this my lifelong accomplishment thing here. If I could do this on a real airplane, I would. But I think you would have to be super rich in order to do it. Because one, you'd have to have the money to get a pilot's license. Two, have your own aircraft. And three, the money to maintain it and to put what you need in there to fly it. Okay, we are under 10 miles. Let's get our flaps down, our gear down. Let's start lining up here. Let's take a look at our little radar map here. We got north. Let's do aircraft orientation here. It's weird. I have to do this first. Yeah, we're not too bad as far as lined up there. If memory serves, I think the altitude is around 900. .8 miles. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I had an easier time trying to line up with the runway using the rudder. On the keyboard, mind you. That's because I could do some fine-tuned controls with the keyboard. Not so much with the control pad. I don't do that with the modern simulators, though. Oh, you serious? We weren't that far up. Come on. Ugh. Okay, well, that doesn't mean that we died. We'll say the landing gear broke. All right, well, I guess we'll end it here. These flights are not always perfect, okay? All right, well, thanks for joining. Hope you join me on the next Amiga video. I don't always crash. Things do work out a little better for me on the modern simulators. These old ones are not always easy, especially with what we just saw. But thanks for joining me, and we'll see you on the next flight. If you thought this flight was interesting, then you might want to check it out on these other flight simulators that you see on your screen. It's just a fun way to relive old memories and see how things changed over the years. Be sure to subscribe to be notified of any new videos, and I'll see you on the next flight.